Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar discussion video. In this one, I want to do some discussion about the obviously upcoming Netflix live action show. Now this will be a follow-up video to one I did in, I think it was August last year. And that was basically, like it says here in the text, what do they need to cover from Book 1 Water and what can they cut or alter. So when I did this the first time, I think we only had the casting for the four main characters and we didn't know anything else apart from that. So the speculation was basically just going from book one as we have it, the 20 episodes, what is important and what can or can't be kept. It was really not a lot based on what the show itself is doing to go on. This time out, we have some of that information. So, going down to some of the new stuff here. So we have a few things. First of all, we know it's going to be 8 episodes. So it's confirmed to be 8-hour-long episodes. It's a little unclear if when they say this, they mean sort of like including credits or not. And is it actually going to be sort of closer to like say 45, 50 minutes of actual content or not? But either way, they're saying 8-hour-long episodes, which is still a solid amount of time. I think it actually comes out as longer than an actual full season of Avatar. But the fact that it is only 8 things means it's going to be still tricky to fit everything in, because you have to take 20 rather scattered episodes from book 1 and put them in 8 hour-long episodes, where each of those 8 things are going to have to be at least somewhat focused on a thing. So what's going on here? What are we going to do? So if we go just quickly to recap what I said in the last video. So I went through the 20 episodes and covered what was needed and important. So the ones marked in yellow are sort of just, without question, these episodes have to be in the show pretty much in full or mostly in full, or else they have a very important aspect to them that do need to be in there. So there's no arguments here. 101, 102, 103 have to be in the show. There's no question whatsoever there. 108 is a little bit different in the sense that this is where the core plot happens. It's the big Avatar Roku moment. It's also a big moment where Zhao, Aang, and Zuko come together, so they would definitely view that as being sort of a notable moment for sure. So I feel like you have to do something related to that, but there's maybe options to not have it be so strictly, placed within this exact moment. The Storm is kind of half and half, where the backstory stuff I think you have to include somewhere in the season, but I don't know if you necessarily have to include the full setup of the fishing village and Sokka going out with the fishermen and then Zuko on the boat. You don't have to do all of that, but the backstory is needed. The Blue Spirit, for similar reasons to 108, I think is sort of needed because it's sort of, these two in a way are both of your sort of mid-season finale type moments, because again it's Aang, Zuko and Zhao coming together. You need the Blue Spirit if you're going to commit to that plot point, and it feels like an action sequence that you're not going to miss out on. The live action movie did this as its sort of big middle of the season action set piece, so I don't think they're going to miss out on it here. And then 118, 119, 120 are absolutely essential. Like, you just have to do basically all of them in full. Everything else, the ones that have more details, is basically 104, you need Suki. There's Kyoshi, and there's also a fight here if you want to do it. 105 is obviously the Bumi episode, so you need that. And then also Bumi tells Aang about Ozai. That's sort of a significant moment, but you can have it happen in a variety of other ways. The key point in a lot of these more solo episodes in book 1 is just that they introduce a character who becomes important later on. So Suki goes on to become a Team Avatar member is very, very important. So that's really, really notable. Bumi is an Order of the White Lotus member and Aang's friend from the previous generation, so it's important. Imprisoned introduces us to Haru and Tyro, and in terms of an introductory thing to the story of Avatar, it's also sort of what tells us a lot about the sort of situation with the Fire Nation Earth Kingdom war. So I feel there's elements of this episode that you need, but you maybe don't have to do it exactly like this. 107 introduces the spirit world and spirits, but is mostly a setup for the bigger episode of 108. And I think this doesn't have to happen in this way. I can't see them devoting like what would effectively be like half an episode to just kind of vague spirit world setup. Waterbending scroll, of course, you eventually have to have Aang attempt to learn waterbending before you get to the Northern Water Tribe. And then I put in here, from the Last Airbender movie, might they make a bigger deal out of this for an Aang character arc related to control of emotion and the loss of his people? We'll see what they do with it. Jet, of course, Jet is important. Similarly, you have the freedom fighters there who also kind of come up later on. And then I'm wondering, this is something they can do in reflection. I'm guessing when Jet was made initially, they maybe didn't know about the Rough Rhino connection, and they added that in later. Might there be an inclusion of them here earlier? Like, tell us Jet's backstory properly, like we learned in Season 2, just up here. Great Divide, unfortunately, I think they will skip it. It's just... They're just going to view it as being the episode I think people expect them to skip, and they'll probably do that or just reference it, kind of like the Ember Island Players does. Fortune Teller, I think, is probably skippable as well, in that the main thing you take from this is it's a little bit of Katang setup, and in the grand scheme of things, the only thing you would really need out of this episode is basically a quick scene where along the way Katara goes in to see a fortune teller. You don't need to make a big deal about it. You can have it literally be a 1-minute scene just for Katara to get that sort of fortune. 115 Bato. So it's obviously a kind of important Sokka development. I think it's somewhat significant to introduce a character like Bato to create that dynamic. It's an episode where Aang makes a mistake, so you can use that to your advantage if you want to. And also June and Nyla are relatively important, because you have to keep in mind they come back for the finale, and the introduction of Nyla Shirshu is actually quite important. There's also a rather big fight there, so you have to also keep that in mind. There are certain episodes that just don't really have a big action set piece, whereas episodes like 115 and say like 104 do actually have substantial fights as well. The Deserter, you need Zhang at some point. It's the Katara healing introduction. You have the Zhao Zhang connection here, and I'm wondering, might they kind of, lean on that a little bit more, that Zhao is actually a really, really interesting character with all the connections he has to things. Aang's firebending arc also starts here. 117, Teo and the Mechanist are introduced. The war balloon setup for the Fire Nation is here. You also have a rather big battle in this episode as well. And it's Aang visiting an air temple, so it's also somewhat significant. And then just in a final airbender point, I'm wondering, might they also use the comic Relics, which is probably the only significant like ATLA comic that is set during book 1. And I think it's the only thing they'd actually use. It was used in part in the Last Airbender movie, so I can see them doing it again. But that's what I came to from the first video, was those general kind of points. So then, we do have a bunch of confirmed characters here. I haven't included the actors because that's not really what we're kind of focusing on here. Their performance, we'll see it and we'll see how they do. So main cast, of course, Ozai is here. I have a couple of characters marked in yellow just to highlight that these are characters who, from the show, have very minimal involvement in book 1, but they're, at least in Ozai and Azula's case, they've announced these actors like officially well ahead of time. It's not just sort of leaked information. So they might do more with them. Iroh, Zhao, Gyatso, again, there's going to be some sort of flashback content, so he will be here. That makes sense for 103, 112, and who knows? They might even go a little bit more into the Air Nomad genocide, which would, I guess, focus on Gyatso also. So that'll be interesting to see. Suki is confirmed, so that's interesting. Yukari is a new character, Suki's mother and the mayor of Kyoshi. So that's the main, I think, change that we know about in terms of something that's going to be different to the show, is that Yukari, I guess, is the replacement for Oyaji. And it highlights that they're going to do more with Suki in her book 1 stuff, which is nice. Kyoshi. This is interesting, because obviously in book 1, the only Kyoshi we see is her as like sort of statues, basically. She doesn't actually like get full-on content until like book 2. So I'm wondering, are they going to like bring up the Avatar Day stuff into this book? Might they do Escape from the Spirit World stuff closer up here? And then obviously there's the question about with Kyoshi, Roku, and then also Karuk, who is confirmed. Are they just doing a general like past life scene where we'll get the kind of rundown of the most recent past lives at some point? Like they could do it in 103 if they absolutely wanted to. In the Roku scene in 108, they could maybe have it be sort of he meets Roku, Kyoshi, and Karuk. And there's a few options that you do actually have. Or in the finale, there's also Spirit World stuff, and you could do past avatars there as well. So it's interesting because, again, they have an actress. They directly have, well ahead of time, confirmed like Kyoshi, not just in leaked information, like the Karuk stuff, like we know about it. Kana or Gran, she's going to be in there, of course. Lieutenant G is confirmed. 112 is the main episode that involves him. And without that, it feels like, what are you actually going to do? So I think this potentially probably confirms that they're maybe going to do the storm or something resembling the storm at some point. At least that kind of conflict on the ship with Zuko and his crew. Roku's confirmed, so we're going to get our 108 scene, which is nice. And then a lot of the characters from the last grouping of episodes. So, you know, Yue, Paku, Arnook, Yagoda. Karuk is here also. I think we actually have information that suggests that it'll be sort of like the past life of Karuk warning them about the attack incoming on the north. So that's that. May Tylee is interesting because they do not appear in book 1 at all in the show, but they're bringing them up here early. And I'm wondering, like, say with Azula, is it just that she'll have her scene as part of the when Zuko gets scarred scene to show that she was there to witness it, and she'll get her scene at the end where she's sent out to set her up as the book 2 villain? And will they just immediately have her with her team? Might they show her gathering the team and have it be a sort of part of the finale, so they don't need to do that setup at the start of book 2? It's hard to know because, of course, these are actors that you're going to have for book 2 and 3. So it makes sense to incorporate them into your book 1 stuff as well, at least a little bit. But might they only have like the one scene? There's always that option. And then, very interesting stuff here. Okay, King Boomy seems to be confirmed. Jet seems to be confirmed. And then, like I said, Karuk, Arnook, and Yagoda. So that presents a lot to us. Again, we'll mark this on the list in just a second. So then, minor characters not yet confirmed. So just in relation to like this list, in terms of here are the things that each episode introduces that kind of are relatively important. So the ones not confirmed yet, and again, we don't have full casting, so this might not be actually true. Don't read too much into this list, in that some of these characters are maybe minor enough that no one would latch on to, like, oh, this person has been cast. So Haru Tyro, we haven't heard anything about yet. The pirates from the Waterbending Scroll haven't been cast. We haven't heard anything about like Ganjin, Zhang tribes, but again, Great Divide was probably always likely to be skipped. Ontwu, Meng from the Fortune Teller, nothing yet. Bato, June, which again is kind of like, I feel like you almost need those characters, but nothing about them yet. Zhang, and also Che from the same episode, we haven't heard anything about yet. And also Teo and the Mechanist. So ultimately, I think if this turns out to be the case, and we don't get any of these characters, I think that's relatively okay. I don't think Haru and Tyro are like so essential, because ultimately, like, Haru comes back. The most significant thing about him coming back is that he has a mustache, and they just are involved minorly in the fighting. He's with the group in the book 3 stuff, but quickly separates with a lot of the other characters who aren't going to stay as part of the team. And it just feels like, you know, he's potentially one of the more forgettable characters. So, you know, it makes sense where he's either going to just be very, very diminished role to the point where it's so minor no one would talk about it, or just not in there at all. The pirates from 109, again, they're in 109, and if they were just in 109, you could absolutely skip them. They do come back again, the whole Zuko assassination thing from just before the finale maybe makes them a little bit important, but there's other ways to do that. So the pirates, I can understand if they wanted to just skip them completely. I don't think they were ever going to do these characters, but, somewhat interesting. Aunt Wu Meng, again, I think that episode ultimately is just relatively skippable in terms of I cannot see them devoting what would have to be a third of an episode to the entire events of the fortune teller. I just can't see it happening. Bado kind of feels important because otherwise, does Sokka have much to do in more the middle of the arc? I get it, he has more significant stuff in the finale, so you maybe don't need to have this ahead of time, and you can incorporate the arc into the finale stuff if you absolutely have to. June, again, it depends on what they're planning to do for the later appearance, because if they have another way for the group to find Iroh and realize that Aang, they can't find him in the finale, you don't need June as such. Zhang, I think if they skip him from book 1, will probably be one of the more significant ones. But ultimately, I think I'm somewhat okay with it. I'm not sure though, because I think if because Zhao's only in book 1. So if you're not going to do the Zhao-Zhang connection here and actually have them confront each other like they do in this episode, I'm not really sure what's going on. So I think Zhang's probably the one who I'd definitely be on the lookout for as we get more and more information about how is he included or not. Che is very kind of skippable. He's not particularly important. He's just there with Zhang. The Mechanist and Teo. And the Northern Air Temple, a lot of the events of that episode in general. I don't think you need to have too much of an explanation for why the Fire Nation have technology and why they can't develop air technology themselves. So, unfortunately, I don't think the characters are fully, absolutely needed. And that episode in general just does not feel like something that they would focus on all that much. So, let's get into talking about it here. So, I just said live action, basically 101, 102, up to 108. This is what we're talking about here. So immediately I'll just put in that I think the events of the first episode are just going to be basically 101, 102, no questions asked. I think it's very clear that that's probably what they're going to have to do. Similarly, the last episode I think is going to be sort of a 119/120. I think they'll probably do a 2-parter for the Water Tribe stuff. So I'm assuming it'll probably be something along the lines of, say, like that for the sort of opener and ending. It gets a little bit more complicated there because, okay, they sort of have to still follow the map. There has to be a general order to this. So from 101, 102, they're not skipping the Southern Air Temple. I think that's so important. You need that. So you have to do 103 here. But then it's such a significant episode on both the Aang and Zuko side of things. Are you devoting an entire hour-long episode to what was previously a 22-minute episode? And the idea is here is if you want to do that, is that you maybe bring the storm flashbacks up here. So that way the idea of them is presented in 103, but if you just do the full things here, it suddenly turns 103 into more of a double part episode. Because otherwise I feel like is there any way to incorporate 103 either into the first episode? I'm not sure about that, because I think you probably do want the Southern Water Tribe stuff to just be the core of the first episode as the intro. And then jump into the second episode with the start of the journeying as such. But then the other point is that they kind of have to go to Kyoshi Island next. So are you doing Kyoshi Island here? And I don't think you are, because it looks like you're expanding out the Kyoshi Island stuff. And that's what's going to be interesting about this. How do they basically get across that traveling aspect of the show while still keeping it consistent across, 8 kind of feature-length episodes? So because if you do that, then suddenly, this episode sort of all of a sudden, this has to be 104. And we say a few things here of expanded with Kyoshi, Suki's mother Yukari. Because if you watch 104 again, there's the Sokka Suki stuff. The Zuko comes in right at the end. He's not a hugely significant part of the episode. Otherwise, it's Aang and Katara with their kind of fame jealousy little arc thing as like the majority of the episode. So I assume that's why they're maybe going more in on this, and they want to develop Suki a whole lot more by making her into more of a significant character. And I think they maybe might surprise us with like maybe having another appearance from Suki in the book. That would make sense. The Kyoshi stuff, again, a lot depends on like, are they just going to talk to Aang about Kyoshi and we'll get flashbacks that way? Or will he be able to sort of connect with the statue of Kyoshi and get something that way? Because they could bring up the sort of Chin stuff with Suki at this point. They could go into the like island history here about the whole, separating the peninsula. I think I spelled that correctly. So, but again, the problem then comes up in that, like, okay, Bumi's in it, so Bumi kind of comes next. I get there's a little bit more of a gap between the here and where Omashu is, but like, if you're going in roughly the same order, because they're going to try to be as accurate as they can. Is 104 or 105 part of this episode? And that's where it's very hard to kind of do this in terms of, I feel like I have to separate it into something else. But if you do 105 here, then you have to. I think there's not enough content in 105 itself, like I covered here, because it's 105. I love the episode, but it is all humor. It's all hijinks. The only significant thing is the Bumi reveal at the end and Bumi telling Aang about Ozai. So there's no way this is getting an entire episode to itself. So where do we go from here? Because like, if you look at the numbers I have next to these, we have 104, 105. We sort of have to skip to sort of how they're doing the 108 stuff, because by the looks of things, we might be sort of skipping over Imprisoned, because this is sort of your little Earth Kingdom kind of section of the story in a way. So I almost feel like what you have to do here is do 105, but incorporate aspects of 106. Use Omashu as I'll type some of this out. 105, and then we do sort of like Omashu as one of the remaining holdouts in the war. Again, it's basically Omashu and Ba Sing Se holding the line. More about how significant the city is. Do you do history here? Again, will you have time to do the whole secret tunnel stuff at the start of book 2? I assume you'll have to do some of it, but I don't mind some of the history about it being brought up earlier here. So just Earth Kingdom in war. So just use this as the episode. Make it just a little bit more serious. That Bumi is the leader of basically the second major Earth Kingdom city holding out against the Fire Nation. Use this as the episode to get people up to speed on what the dynamic actually is in the war. Highlight that the mail systems in Omashu, there's a reason there's so many weapons going around there, is that this is a major place for shipments of weapons getting out across the Earth Kingdom. So sort of bring 106 in a smaller way. And I think that's a way to do it. That, like, maybe on the way to Omashu, they experience something happening in a city just beforehand. Maybe as they come out, they see some of this happening as well. But you have to, I think, do some of that here. Some of that groundwork to just feature stuff from more of the episodes. Because otherwise, like, are they going to introduce the Spirit World stuff with Bumi? I'm not really sure about that. So let's say we keep it somewhat accurate here, and we do sort of 107/108, 107 quickly covered. Keep it simple. So don't make it this vastly complicated thing, I think, where, like, he needs to do this at this time and this at that time, blah, 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 blah. I think you can make this one work in a way where, like, it's so tricky because we're running out of episodes here. Because you see, you need the, need Roku to be the one to give Aang his goal. You know, Comet, explained, time limit. You know, the time limit needs to be brought up at this point. But are they going to wait this long? This is what's very tricky, because then all of a sudden, like, there's no way, like, if we're doing that big sequence where, like, you know, Aang has to go to the Fire Nation, land on the island, meet the Fire Sages, Zhao, Zuko have to arrive on the scene, have that whole big escape sequence, plus do the Spirit World setup stuff a little bit beforehand. I don't know if there's time to go into anything else, because, like, after this you're going to have Aang try and do waterbending, but we know Jet is involved, and then you also have 2 more important episodes here. So by the looks of things, we're in a situation where they might have to skip, like, all of these episodes. Because again, Teo isn't confirmed yet, Zhang isn't confirmed yet, Bato, June aren't confirmed yet, and they probably will have to skip over this. So it does feel like what you have to do next is some combination of, like, Aang tries water bending / 110 Jet and freedom fighters. We skip 11. Zuko storm stuff with G. Again, if G is being cast, like, he's either just there in the background and you're not going to really have too many significant scenes with him, because the only major notable G scene is the stuff during the storm and their argument and G finding out Zuko's backstory. So like I said, just to keep this sort of flowing to some degree, this maybe has to happen. Like, can it happen this early on? Like, in like one of the earlier episodes, or is the Zuko stuff happening in the middle of all of this? Because this where it gets a little bit tricky. Of, like, you're gonna have Zuko here, he's doing his own thing in this episode. He attacks Kyoshi Island in this episode. Potentially isn't involved in this one all that much. Involved in this one. There's this, and then you have to do, I guess, also 113. This is where it gets sort of very tricky. Like, this Blue Spirit stuff, all of a sudden. You have to cram a lot of things into this. Now, maybe I'm being a little bit much here with saying both, like, 2 episodes for the finale here. But I think it, just based on what we've heard coming out of, like, the production, it felt like they spent quite a bit of time on the Water Tribe stuff. So I think you need more than 1 episode if you're going to make a big deal about it and, like, include, say, Karuk giving his warning and so on in it. So that's all sort of interesting. So you could see the kind of tricky aspect here, even with actually some information that will tell us what they are and are not doing. Now, the problem with this might be something like, say, this. Maybe I still am over-exaggerating how much stuff they'll do on Kyoshi Island. In that, but I also find it very difficult to try and incorporate 104 and 105 into the same episode, which is an interesting one. Just because you're going to have to show them, like, traveling, and it feels weird if you just have, like, basically 2 episodes in one. So that's always a bit, you know, awkward, I think. So, the only other way I can maybe see it is you actually have 103 and 104 happen at the same time, because at least then there's a sense where, like, oh yeah, Kyoshi Island is actually relatively close to the Southern Air Temple. You can maybe make that work, but I think you just encountered the same problem, but just on, like, the other side. This is obviously where it gets kind of very tricky to see just like how they're going to do the flow between episodes, in that they're going to have their own, like, I suppose, unique scenes as well. Stuff that we maybe didn't know about from before, but this is the way I'm kind of leaning. The only other thing I could maybe think of is maybe they're cutting out the whole 107, 108 plot. And maybe, let's say they do this, of like, we just get rid of that completely. And we say that either, say, somewhere here, Roku past life connection. So you have the 108 thing actually happen here, just to create more significance to the Southern Air Temple and the connection when he goes into the Avatar state at the temple. That's a way to just, I suppose, in an earlier episode, otherwise, like, you're potentially waiting until episode 4 or 5 to get to just like, here is the actual main basic plot of what Avatar Book 1 is about. So I can see this being brought up, and this opens up a little bit of the middle of the series a little bit for you. This way you can actually give Blue Spirit, which I think you are going to do, a bit of a chance to breathe. So you can see, like, say, Blue Spirit, I'd say almost like / relics. I think you can use relics here as the setup for why he gets captured, instead of the random, you know, Aang goes out to get medicine, Yuyan archers come after him type situation. But it also feels weird at this point that we're maybe like stopping this. So like, let's bring this up here. Let's say cut this out, put this here. So you have an episode that sort of starts maybe with Zuko and the Freedom Fighters. Jet does some of the stuff with in the storm, chasing them. But again, that's where it gets very awkward, in that like the gang is dealing with Jet, and you still maybe have to have something with G. But maybe this is just not significant. Maybe G is not actually getting a moment. Because again, he's not that important. Like, you wouldn't say he's like super important. There's a reason he's not really brought up again after book 1. So do you just do like some sort of early Jet thing and then go into Blue Spirit? But again, that almost feels like a bit of a disconnect, because Jet's going to be quite a heavy thing to have to explore and bring up, and give like Sokka his arc in that episode, the little bit of romance maybe set up there. But again, they might incorporate Jet in like a different way into things. It depends. Like, he might not need an entire, 10, 15, 20 minute segment, and can just be more of a like 5-minute character, just maybe highlighting that he's doing stuff in the background. He doesn't need to have a full focus episode. But if this opens up the door to, like, say, an episode gap, then you have to have something with these episodes in there. And it's where, like, I feel the most significant thing here is probably, I think, just the Zhang stuff, because where am I going? Down. So I think, in a way, you have to have Zhang and Zhao connection. Katara healing is like a main thing. And fire bending, like you do have to, I think, get those points out at some point in the opening book, because otherwise I don't know where you're going to find time to do it. And I think you have to have Aang have a bit of an issue with firebending to set up the significance of Zuko becoming his teacher later on. But I don't know if you do this in full. That's the kind of tricky thing here. So I'm kind of wondering, like, you take away a lot of the intro and maybe slow-paced aspect of this as a solo episode, and incorporate Zhang into like another kind of type thing. And I don't know, like, is there a way to incorporate, say, Zhang into, say, like the Blue Spirit in some way? I'm not overly sure about that one. What are the other episodes around? So Bato, again, they're very separate things. I think there's the least amount of important stuff in this episode. So you're talking about, like, say, this and this. And again, this is where, like, again, you could use the Northern Air Temple for this as well. You could do like a relics with Northern Air Temple as well. And this is where it just gets very confusing, because if these characters are confirmed and a lot of these rumors turn out to be true, you suddenly require the characters to be in a lot of places in a very few amount of episodes. Now, I think a large part of that is that I think it's difficult for us as fans to really picture what an hour format would be like in terms of how they do the adaptation. So again, like I said, a lot of these things that maybe I feel are kind of like, oh, you have to do this, might just be sort of one-off scenes that they have transitioning from one thing to another. But that's been the very tricky thing. And I think I said this a lot in the first video going through this, is like, do you just have episodes that are like half Kyoshi Island, half Omashu, and you just have to have a little bit of a harsh cut of like, they're traveling, so this is the way it happens, in the middle of an episode, that like the first half, it's almost literally 2 episodes in one. I think they'll want to make it flow a little bit more, but it feels like it's very difficult to in a way work around that, because like obviously I've done 2 separate things there of like ordering it around here. Now maybe they compress it a little bit more. Like say they do 18, 19, 20 all in one episode, which I don't think they will, but say they do that. That does open it up to have more distinct episodes. But then all of a sudden, you could create a situation where you are maybe rushing to do your entire Northern Water Tribe finale in one episode, but you're devoting the exact same amount of time to potentially the Deserter with a reference to Northern Air Temple or something like that. And you can see where we're a little bit out of line here, whereas the things that are very concrete with this series are that you have strong episodes in terms of continuity at the start, strong continuity at the end, and then you're a little bit all over the place in the middle. So it's definitely these 4 episodes here that I think are going to be the ones that are like, how on earth do you actually make this function? Because the way the Last Airbender movie did it is that they had basically a montage to the Earth Kingdom, highlighting the influence of the Avatar, why the Earth Kingdom is still sort of fighting. And then you had your sort of scattered scenes of like, you had a kind of relics-like moment where Aang sort of gets captured, going into like the blue spirit. Along the way, there was also you had the quote-unquote Roku moment, but it was Roku as a dragon type stuff. And they just, in the movie, cut out every minor character basically, in that like they initially I think had the Kyoshi warriors in, but then cut that out like 100%, and then like there was no Zhang or anyone like that in it at all, and it's a wonder how they managed to make that work while having none of the like unique dynamics here, whereas they know they're going to need some of them, but they also need to make it flow. So I'm not particularly sure what exactly they're going to do. Like, unless they make some kind of very notable changes and just have sort of a thing where like, maybe we don't even go to Omashu. Maybe the King Boomy stuff is literally just a moment. And I think that's probably like something that actually is maybe likely to happen. That, you know, it looks like they are expanding out Kyoshi Island, but maybe this is not what they're going to do when it comes to Omashu. But then what do you do? Because it feels weird to just have a quick like drive-by on the on Omashu when he is a relatively significant character. Again, we have to wait and see. Like I said, some of these characters are not like fully confirmed yet. They haven't officially made the announcements. But there's enough like ones where it's kind of like, you know, quote-unquote confirmed, like say Kurok, where it's like, okay, I appreciate bringing him up, that we're actually going to get some Kyoshi stuff in this, but otherwise it's like, okay, what exactly are we going to do? Will they do more with Azula? That's the other point here, like I was saying earlier on, is that Azula's confirmed for this already, has the actress. Like, is she literally just in 1 or 2 quick scenes as more of a setup, or like we have her ready to go for more content in book 2? Same with Mei and Ty Lee. I'm not really sure. So in the comments, I'm just going to wrap it up there. What do you think how do you think the book is going to flow? How are they going to do in live action the entirety of book 1 in just 8 episodes, knowing that it looks like they're using this sort of general group of characters here? So it looks like they're sort of skipping certain key episodes for the most part, but they're keeping certain ones in. The main thing I really want to ask you guys about is just these kind of middle episodes. Like, what do they do to make these sort of flow together? And do you agree with the idea that like it will be a 2-part like finale in the Water Tribe? Do you agree that, you know, they'll be spending this much time at the very start or not? So that's been my thoughts, but in the video, in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are. But that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.